my attention was grabbed in the last week or so by a revelation coming out of a federal judge's court in Minnesota. And it sounded to me like it's one of these deals. We had some of these at the senior level of the FBI. Hey, Frank, you're on this panel or this special committee, but it's probably never going to meet. But it's like, and you forget about it. You forget about it. And in this case, this judge must have been tapped on the shoulder and said, hey, remember when we put you on I want to get this right, the alien terrorist detention court? And she probably said, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. And she has a filing for the first time in history. The Trump administration has activated a never before used court. Tell us, what is the alien terrorist deportation court?
Right. So it's the ATRC, so the Alien Terrorist Removal Court. And this was created by statute in 1996. I was actually surprised to read that because I would have assumed that this was created after 9/11, for example, but it was created in 1996. And as you mentioned, it's never been used. I think the best analogy to use, Frank, is the FISA court. So this is a statutory framework through which the Attorney General can submit an application to a court based on secret evidence. And a judge can look at that evidence and determine whether a person should be removed from the country. And I just want to point out a few things that I encourage people to read Steve Vladek's piece on this on Substack. He has a Substack called One First because he's excellent. He literally has written the national security law textbook, which I teach in class. So I was very interested in his take on it. But like the FISA court, the ATRC is comprised of 5 Article 3 judges that are appointed by the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. FISA has 11 judges. This has 5. And I think that's important because, as you noted, when you read this opinion coming out, that does mean that these are Article 3 judges. These are lifetime appointments. And one thing that we might want to talk about is the difference between them and Article 2 judges, which are executive branch judges, like immigration judges. In some ways, they are a little bit more insulated from political pressure. That's the good news. The bad news is that basically this evidence is presented in secret. And so I'm reading from the summary here. A single judge may grant the application for removal upon finding that the alien in question has been identified correctly as an alien terrorist present in the United States and that removal under other available legal means would pose a risk to national security. And I think where we should be concerned, Frank, is this administration plays pretty fast and loose with who is considered a terrorist.
Yeah, and it seems like you've kind of hit the nail on the head, because what can we glean from the judge's response to this? It sounds like she has questions, and maybe even right on point with what you're saying. Did you see her response?
I did, and so she's exactly questioning that. What she questioned was, so they've received this application from the Attorney General or acting Attorney General. That says, basically, we think this person is a terrorist. All other available means to address this would implicate national security. Therefore, give us an order to deport this person. And what she's saying in this opinion is, I have concerns about the nexus between the evidence the government has and the conclusion that it's reaching that this person is a terrorist. So in some ways, I think we should be heartened by this, because it really means that judges here have the opportunity, and we've seen lower court judges do this all over the place in the country, to really hold the government to a high standard. Now, if this was happening in immigration court, remember, immigration courts fall under the executive branch. I mean, president can, at this point, just fire them. So in a lot of ways, there's a little bit more accountability, but there's also less transparency here. One other thing I should note, Frank, is that there is the right of appeal, and the appeal can go to a normal district court. So this is another kind of safeguard that's in there. And one of the points that Steve Vladeck makes that I thought was really interesting, and it made me think, is that because of that appeals process and this kind of standard that the judges are going to be looking for, this is not the kind of court that is going to really be amenable to mass deportations.
Right. It's a case-by-case kind of a court.
It was created as sort of, I think, like an emergency mechanism to do some sort of like surgical, I don't know. Like, yeah. I'm trying to imagine who would be a terrorist who would be so dangerous that we would actually want to deport, as opposed to like.
Well, I'm going through the same. Anyway. I'm going through the same exercise. I mean, I've led joint terrorism task forces, field offices for a brief time. I was deputy assistant director in the counterterrorism division before I went over to counterintel. Let's go through some history post 9/11. We've had real live bomb throwing terrorists. We've had Al Qaeda and Boko Haram and ISIS present here. So the imagination runs wild as to why this court would be the way to go and get somebody out of here, and why we wouldn't prosecute them, flip them. And I hear what they're allegedly saying, which is it could jeopardize national security, meaning sources and methods, usually, right? Well, that happens all the time. We get intercepts all the time that somebody's going to throw a bomb, and yet we figure it out. So what concerns you? Well, first of all, what scenarios, if you can come up with any, do you think might be in play here?
I can't think of one. And I think there's a reason that this court has never been instituted in 30 years. In fact, I think one of the big problems that the Trump administration is going to run into, and probably the reason that it hasn't been used, especially even after 9/11, when you would expect that it might be used, is this problem, right? Because you have the application of the government saying this person's a terrorist, deport them. What did we learn after 9/11? Even the people at Guantanamo were entitled to a factual hearing if they contested their terrorist status, to be able, in other words, the government had a burden of proof to show that they were terrorists in order to keep them there. That was at Guantanamo. These are people who are in the United States. And as you know, Frank, from constitutional law, when you get more ties to the United States, you get more constitutional protections. So even if you are here illegally, you have certain due process protections. If you are a legal permanent resident, you have very high due process protections, very close to to being a resident or a citizen, right? So yes. I think that there are a lot of due process problems here that no administration before was really going to want to tackle in this kind of setting, when you could just address them by prosecuting them or taking
a couple of things. I've observed over the second Trump term a couple of things that might play into this, and then there's a third one that really bothers me. But the first two are inherent laziness, meaning let's rush to do something. I'll pick the blowing vessels out of the water in the Caribbean. Could you do it differently? Of course you could do it differently. If you've got the evidence that someone's a drug courier for a cartel, grab them, prosecute them, flip them, take down the cartel. We're just going to blow them out of the water, which, by the way, I saw reporting recently that said it's done nothing to staunch cocaine flow into the United States, but that's another day. You could, let's go to another thing. There's somebody I don't like. We're going to handpick an AUSA or a USA in the Eastern District of Virginia, and we're going to prosecute them. We know we really don't have the evidence, but we're going to do it anyway. There's just this inherent laziness. Secondly, there's a flexing of power that they love to do. Somebody tells them, hey, you've got this court that's never been used. And they go, shoot, let's try it. And so I see those two things, but there's a third scenario. And people tell me, hey, Frank, you're always looking at the darkest possibility. Yes, that's what I did in the FBI. And so what if, I'm sure you're tracking, Asha, all of the attempts by this administration to focus on left-wing terrorism, right? And then fast forward to Marco Rubio, last week, calling together reps from 66 nations and telling them we all have to get on this far left Antifa problem. It's an international terrorism problem. And Steve Miller showed up and talked at this thing. I don't know why, but he said, he went even further. He said, we don't even need violence. All people on the left are terrorists. So is it possible that of course, this is conjecture, that we've got a left-wing accused terrorist, maybe from overseas, that is now before this court?
I mean, it's possible. It's also possible that it is some rando that was rounded up at Home Depot. I mean, we don't know. So what I see here, Frank, is that this is a Stephen Miller special. Okay. Mm-hmm. There has been a real he wants to get people out in as large numbers and as quickly as possible. And what they are finding is that every thing that they've tried is not working. They've tried the Alien Enemies Act, right? Trump passed an executive order declaring Tren de Aragua a foreign terrorist organization, right. MS-13. And then they go round up people and they're like, well, you're MS-13 and you're TDA. And they put them on a bunch of planes and they sent them to El Salvador. That didn't work out so well. Yep. Right. They, it sort of worked out for them, but they got a lot of bad press for them. So this is I think another attempt that they think could be, I think what you have is not just laziness, but also incompetence. They fired all the competent attorneys. So anyone looking at this who would understand it would be like, yeah, this is going to be even slower than the immigration courts, and it's going to subject you to even more scrutiny, and it's going to have appeals, and you're not going to get it done. But because they don't read and they don't think about process, I think you're right. I think exactly what you said. Somebody came across it and was like, oh my God, the secret court. And they automatically assume that they can control it and move it out. I'm sure they are shocked that this judge just said, actually, I don't really think there's any evidence here. Let's look into this more. Let's do the countdown before Trump does his Truth Social post, blasting this judge and saying that she's, helping to harbor terrorists or something like that. But to your point, to your original question, could be an accused leftist terrorist, could be, the guy from down the street.